Welcome to Socializing Security, where every week we have a discussion about security, compliance, and beyond.
Our goal is to learn and grow by socializing each week's topic with each other, our guests, and with you.
A quick compliance note, this podcast is meant for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or regulatory advice.
We're glad you've joined us, and we hope you'll learn along with us. Welcome back to another episode of Socializing Security. We really appreciate you joining us once again, or if this is your first time, we hope you really enjoy this and subscribe and want to listen to more of us or watch more of us on YouTube if you prefer podcasts that way. We do both. So today we've got a interview coming up with Yousuf Khan. Milu, why don't you give a quick introduction to him?
Yeah, I was introduced to Yousuf by a team member that I met at RSA, so grateful for the introduction. And Yousuf is currently a partner at Ridge Ventures, so he's in the VC space, but he has worked as an investor for a couple years now, investing in all different types of really B2B software companies. And his background, though, is before he was in investment in venture capital, he was also a CIO and a CISO for some large technology companies. So he worked with MoveWorks as well as Pure Storage, Qualys. So he has some really large names on his resume and definitely comes with a large background working with CISOs and CIOs. And I think he's going to walk us through kind of the difference between those roles and really what it looks like to make the pivot from really being a practitioner to then working in the investment side.
Yeah, his background is super fascinating. I can't wait to dig into it with him because, he comes from multiple different backgrounds and has made a couple different leaps in his career that, is somewhat echoes some of what I've done with my career. Only he's done it at the top of the org, where I've kind of stayed at the bottom of the org. That to me, what that says is he's got a great roundabout perspective of things. It's not just that he's always been at a CIO level, that he's only been at one company, but he's also been not only kind of on the customer side, being a CIO, even at a vendor, you're more on the customer side than you are on the vendor side at that point, but also being in the VC side. So being able to have that round perspective of things I think is going to result in a really cool conversation. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and bring him on.
Yeah, let's do it.
And we're back with Yousuf. Yousuf, why don't you give a quick introduction so people can kind of hear your voice and know who you are?
Well, great to meet you both. And a little bit about my background. I'm a general partner at a firm called Ridge Ventures. We are an early stage VC firm that invests in B2B software, typically at the seed and Series A stage. We've been around several years. Early investors in companies like Fastly and Braze, both of which went public, and a whole host of other companies in our portfolio. Part of my background really comes from the operating world. I was a CIO and a CISO of several companies. I was a CIO at Qualys, which is a public cybersecurity company, and then a company called Pure Storage, which I joined pre-IPO and then spent several years helping scale post-IPO. I went on to join a little company at that time called MoveWorks, which recently has been in the press for being potentially acquired by ServiceNow. So I spent some time there helping build both the customer success function and the company operations, and especially in IT and security. And then lastly did a brief stint as CIO and CISO of Automation Anywhere. And in between that time, I've helped out a number of early stage companies where I really liked the product and thought it was worth championing. They range from products such as Zoom, which I was an early customer of in 2015, right down to companies like Slack and MoveWorks and Datadog and others. So love the innovation ecosystem. Love talking to founders at early stages, and have built up a sizable CIO CISO community over time, which I do my best to probably congregate more for group therapy than anything else. But other than that, it's been a pretty good community to be part of, and love having conversations such as these.
Yeah, I like the community call out there because I've been a big community builder myself in the past as well. And yeah, that's a space that actually needs that mental health, which is another big interest of mine. We've actually had episodes with mental health hackers founder Amanda Berlin in the past, which is her focus more on the practitioner level. But I definitely know she knows a lot of CISOs out there too, because this is a team sport. We're a big fan of security as a team sport, not just in the practitioner of and doing security, but in the mental health and supporting one another through all of that. So really, really awesome background there.
Appreciate it.
It's a lot of fun stuff. I like the variety. That's always been a big part of my career path too, is the variety of stuff. So maybe let's kind of start more at the beginning of your journey, and let's talk a little bit about your time as a CIO, as a CISO. Obviously, a very important role, and in that time frame, the CISO role changed a lot. I guess what would you say are the common things that those roles that you were successful with in those roles that people may not always think about? Like, they think about the leadership aspect of things and being at the top of the pyramid, but I know unless pretty much everybody's beholden to somebody else, so there's managing up as well. So I'm kind of curious what that was like for you.
Yeah, no. So I think that one of the things that's pretty consistent is everybody vies for the title. Like, I want to be a CIO, I want to be a CISO, and then they get the title and then say, "Now what?" So that's been very, very common. For me, I've been the first CIO CISO only. I've never really come on board and taken something else. So I've always been in a place where I've seen a foundation being built and then really kind of get it organized and help it scale. I think there's a few key things that most CIOs and CISOs, and I held both roles in conjunction, and there's a very deliberate reason for that. In one company, I was CIO and we had a CISO, and I was totally fine. In another company, I was CIO and CISO, and the reason for that was, a lot of CISOs do not want to be active practitioners in building at the very, very early stages. Like, it's not something that's attractive. A lot don't, and they want to be able to come into a place they're like, okay, I'm going to build on top of this. So I think the advice I would give to people who take the role, and probably key parts of it, number one is you got to work and build on communication first and foremost. It's underrated, it's underappreciated, but it's actually the most critical part now more than ever before, and not just because more employees are remote, any of that sort of stuff. It's actually about demonstrating, articulating the importance of changes that need to happen if you are a CISO in a company. And these things take time. Change management is really hard. So being able to communicate that both at the board level, both at the executive level, and then at the company-wide employee level, and then sometimes even partners, is absolutely critical. And the people who don't do that, in my viewpoint, will not be very successful. And so I think that's a skill that you need to be able to develop. Second, I think most critically is you've really got to figure out how you're able to come up with clear prioritization and then communicate that effectively. There is going to be no shortage of work, whether you're a CIO or a CISO. The reality is, with CISO related work, you do have incidents that you have to ultimately change a whole set of priorities and basically move towards. Heaven forbid we have a 0 day, but that ultimately happens where your priorities just, what you've planned for is out the door. There's that old saying that everybody has a great plan until you get punched in the face.
Yep.
So unfortunately, that sometimes happens, and that is occupational hazard for a CISO role. And so being able to be agile and be able to respond effectively, I don't think enough people have been able to figure out. And I think they need to be able to do that. So running those drills, building a culture amongst the team to be able to help respond and build that, I think that's super important. And I think that's really important from a leadership perspective. Number three is you've really got to build good partnerships. That's partnerships amongst the executive team, being able to actually drive changes through the organization requires partnership at every level. It's not just about communication, which is my earlier point. It's really about being able to get people aligned and then helping drive a large part of that work and having it prioritized. I often say that the best CISOs are the ones who have a plan. They are typically the ones that people want to follow. As long as you have a plan, you're able to communicate that. I think it's absolutely critical for you to do that. Now, the reality is, if you're a CIO, you have to respond and you have to articulate priorities, and you probably have better cycle times to be able to do it based on different calendar quarter end, whether you're managing ERP or other system or upgrades. For a CISO, those timelines can be very fluid. And so you've got to be able to really respond and sort of figure out how you're able to effectively deliver to those timelines and do that in a very, very kind of really impactful fashion. So those are the things that I tend to really advise people and thought about myself when I got into that role.
I love the emphasis on communication and culture. I think that's so important. I think honestly, that's probably important for most roles, but definitely when you're coming in from like a security perspective to actually establish a culture within an organization to actually execute on your plans that you're coming in, I think is huge. How would you really differentiate the responsibilities between the CIO and the CISO? Obviously, it sounds like you were able to hold both of those roles within the organization, but can you kind of clarify like where those responsibilities kind of differ between those two?
Yeah, I think the company was desperate, to be honest with you. So I think that's okay. I'll totally take that. No problem at all. So look, I've really been a CIO. I've really been a CISO with a small c. But the way to explain that is I was CIO of Pure Storage. We didn't have a security function. We didn't have a security team. One of my first hires was a director of security. Kevin Neely is brilliant. And the reason for that was to be able to start to build a foundation to therefore attract a full-time CISO. Right. And they'd be able to say, okay, because when a CISO comes in, they're like, well, okay, it means that you've got some processes in place. You've got a team that you've hired. Now they just need to be organized and managed. And thank you very much. I'll sort of take it from here. Right. So so that's just to give you some context about why I held both of those roles, but also because I enjoy it, to be honest with you. I think one of the things that is really important is building a security culture in a company. And I tend to have the saying, which security is everyone's problem. And that is something I help to drive in each of the roles that I typically have. Now, in terms of role differentiation, CIO focus is really on a few key things. One is employee productivity, first and foremost. Second is core systems in the company. Number three, infrastructure. Number four, data. And number five, of course, innovation and transformation. On the CISO side of things, there is overlap because of just the nature of the systems. For example, if you think about email, ultimately a CIO's organization is administering email, whether it's Office 365 or G Suite. They will, of course, as a result, be a stakeholder in understanding what email security strategy could be, but the CISO is going to influence that and probably will be the right decision maker to say what the best solution is. Okay. The second aspect is the CISO role is probably much more driven towards security holistically across the entire company, not just core systems that the IT organization typically holds. So for example, it's very likely that a CISO will own the security of the actual product that a company is typically doing. It most likely will be involved in physical security if the company has large campuses or large facilities that need to be done, therefore partner up with the facilities function to be able to provide a vantage point there as well. So that's kind of where they differ. Ultimately, the other aspect is if you have a major breach or a major incident, it's the CISO's organization that is going to drive remediation and being able to respond to that. And I think that's really critical. In both of them, super important leadership roles. One of the things I tend to do is to be able to make sure that I'm an advocate for the role, because I think a lot of companies underappreciate it. They don't understand kind of what the role is, what levels they need. And so I tend to advise a lot of my friends and people in the community to be able to say how to best position themselves for those type of roles, and also be able to say, okay, how they can do it effectively and share the lessons I've learned.
Yeah, I like that. A lot of times you do see the CIO and the CISO being in the same seat, if you will. And I oftentimes worry that means that they're not prioritizing the security as much as maybe they should. I like that idea of, someone's got to build it. So I'll build it as a CISO and happily hand it over to somebody else. Because I think once you build that org, it quickly becomes more than one person can handle to do both. And, Milo and I have had some conversations around the differences there and who needs to care about which part of, like with data security. Some parts need to be owned individually because there is a level of accountability that sometimes needs to happen between those two seats. So it's always kind of interesting to see people that have had to do both, and what those different perspectives are or maybe should be, because it's both of them are tough roles in any organization I've ever been in.
Yeah, no, and like I said, these are tough roles, irrespective of vertical, irrespective of industry. Um, the harsh reality is that the CISO and security organizations were created organically over time. You're managing infrastructure, and you start saying, "Well, we better secure this. It's looking a little bit difficult. We don't know who's basically looking to try and ping us all the time and be able to actually dedicate time, resources, otherwise." And so, each of these industries and companies effectively morphed as a result of what you saw, and as companies were looking to invest more in technology. And so, of course, one of the issues that has always come into play is you're building software products really fast, and as a result of that, being able to secure them and build a culture with your engineering organization and be able to drive, go towards the kind of what they term as shift left, has always been a challenge for most organizations. So I can't reiterate enough like how critical it is for early stage, mid stage, large stage companies to have actually people in place, even if it requires training them and building it from a career standpoint, to have that as a core focus, because it's something that it's just absolutely table stakes now.
So you made the move out of that role and into more of a venture capitalist or a VC role. For those that aren't necessarily familiar with that space, it's people who know the industry well and want to invest money and to help startups. You talked a little bit about advising different companies and being involved in just helping companies get up even before you were on the VC side of things. So as somebody myself who would oftentimes, I was more kind of on the influencer side of things than on the advising side of things, but would find interesting companies and try to help them get their message out and be able to see, help people see the wider view of the products and offerings that are out there. I kind of have a heart for that as well. So I'm curious how that played into your decision to make the move over to the VC side of things. What kind of drove that decision?
Well, I think a large part of it was, I discovered over time that tend to get better at the job when you do it more. I've been a CIO of 5 companies.
Yeah.
And so I tend to joke, as exciting as it is to rebuild and re-architect Salesforce yet again. um, you just, you get better at it, right? Same on the security side. You're like, oh yeah, I can build out a vulnerability management program. I can't wait to do that. Sounds fantastic. The problem is, somewhere down the line, you may get better at it, but you don't get as much fulfillment from it, right? And I sort of believe that you have to be working at something 100% until you're not, and you don't feel that you can do it 100%. Then, candidly speaking, you're holding up somebody else's place, right? Somebody else probably wants that more and probably deserves it. So that's one part of it, which was just it was the right time. There was a level of fulfillment. I could have very easily stayed to continue in those roles, but I wasn't learning and growing as much as I wanted to. Second was really, I love working with founders, love seeing products being built. It's something that's been, been a part of my life for decades. And the reason, and that's just, there's a great story towards it, to be honest, to be able to, have a conversation and see a company then being built over time and actually grow into a product like Zoom, for example, in 2015. I was a customer then. MoveWorks, I was the first customer of that company, and now, of course, that went on to get several hundred customers and do really well. So as I was helping a lot of founders over time, either as an advisor, for example, with Zoom, or as an early customer with companies like MoveWorks, I discovered that I really enjoyed seeing those companies and seeing those founders successful. If you are able to, help create a platform for people, if you're able to assist them in some way, shape, or form, and to do that at scale, that's something that I really enjoyed. And I think being in a venture capital firm was something that could allow that to happen. Second, it's a very different business, but it is kind of at the nexus of technology innovation, especially what you're seeing with a lot of the work that's happening in AI. Definitively being able to build out a company and see that grow, and really being able to see the output of that with investment dollars sort of going into place. And I think I'm very thoughtful about that. So I think it kind of morphed as a natural part of me connecting with tons of founders, and founders saying, I wish you could invest. And I said, I wish I could invest as well. And then in order for me to do that, I really need to be at a VC firm to be able to do that. And that's what I've been doing for the last several years.
How do you kind of manage thinking about which companies you are feeling like are the right company to invest in? Like, what is your strategy when you're kind of, especially thinking through the technology companies that you're looking at? What are the types of organizations that you're really looking to partner with?
I usually ask ChatGPT, and that helps. No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. Uh, I have a few key areas. I think one is we invest in B2B software. So every VC firm is different. They have different investment theses, different strategies. Ours is focused on B2B software, and that's generalist across different verticals, and but it's our thesis is that businesses are buying and building and transforming via software more than ever before, even more so with AI. And so that's one piece. So we don't get distracted from that. We stick to B2B software. We wish everyone lots of success in all the other sectors that they're looking to do, but we're going to stick to B2B software. Second is at this stage of investing, typically at seed and Series a large aspect of the focus is really on the team. Can this team build a product? Can they sell? Can they hire? What is their track record? How big this market looks like. So there's a lot that goes into due diligence for us before we make an investment decision. And part of that requires us to spend time with the founder or the founding team, as well as come up with a bit of a thesis around it. And third is, we're known, and as I mentioned, I'm probably one of maybe 20 people in the venture industry who comes from a CIO, CISO background. So there's a little bit of a personal aspect, which is like, would I still buy this product? Like, is this, if they came to present to me and when I was CIO of PureStore, it's like, would I say I would want to pay 20,000 for this year and 50,000 next year? And if the answer to that is no, then I'd probably go and speak to some of my CIO and CISO friends and say, hey, what do you think? Am I missing something here? And, they'll either agree with me or violently disagree. And so that's also part of diligence that sort of comes into place. All the companies that I've invested in, I would buy the product. I stand by the decision. Companies are built up over time. So there's one thing about having, focus and likability for the product, because that resonates. But company building and having a product are two very, very different things. You can have the greatest product in the world, but if you can't sell it, if you can't market it properly, if you can't get it in the hand of customers, if you can't make it successful, it's not going to go anywhere, right? And so those are the different factors that sort of typically go in. And unfortunately, in venture, as I get the guidance of people who've been more experienced in this industry, said, you are paid to take the risk, and so it's your objective to be able to, you have fiduciary duty to your investors to be able to invest in the areas where you find that this will be a successful company and have a successful outcome. And as a result of that, everyone benefits as well. And some of that will be great, and unfortunately, some of that will not be, and that's occupational hazard in the venture world. But sometimes you just don't know. Sometimes it's market timing. Zoom, everyone says, oh, pandemic must be great. Zoom was successful way before the pandemic. It was a phenomenal company way before the pandemic. Of course, it accelerated, and it accelerated its growth during the pandemic, but it's been a successful company way before that, right? So it's a factor of a number of different things.
I really love that emphasis, though, that you use your background as a CIO and CISO of making sure that the companies that you're looking to evaluate and to invest in, that you're really asking yourself, is this a product that I would have recommended we purchase before we really think about investing? Like, I really think that's a very smart investing strategy. And obviously you can leverage your background with, the skill set that you have.
I appreciate that. I think the other thing is like, so thank you for the compliment. Some of that is maybe it comes with strong opinions, right? And so I know if I've had too many Diet Cokes, I'm like, no way, I would never buy that product. And like my partner's like, okay, well maybe let's just ask a couple of our CIO CISO friends what they think. So due diligence is the most important thing. The lesson I learned is don't seek validation, seek the ground truth, right? And so you do that by being able to get independent opinions of experts, for example, of sample buyers. So I reach out to, a number of my CIO friends, a number of my CISO friends. I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? And so, for example, it's the opposite has also been true. I, for example, met a couple of companies in particular space, and I was like, oh my God, I've probably been trying to solve this for ages. And I spoke it was very interesting. I reached out to a bunch of CISO friends of mine. I said, this is the problem, right? They're like, oh yeah, 100% is a problem. And I said, okay, well, I met this company. They're like, yeah, it's a problem, but I don't really care that much about it. I'm like, well, wait, what? Wait, what? What are you talking about? We've each been talking about this at multiple dinners that we've done. And He said, yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying it is a priority, and yeah, I'd probably pay for it. But the line of priorities that I basically have, if you're telling me I'm going to pay for this solution versus defending myself against North Korea, I think I know what I'm going to pick. I was like, oh, okay. And then I asked somebody else, they're like, yeah, it's a really important, big problem, but we can deal with it in other ways. I'm like, oh, okay. And so therefore I didn't end up investing in this space. And that was probably the right decision in the bigger scheme of things.
In your experience as a CIO and having to make decisions as to whether to buy a product or not, obviously, with your experience with Zoom, you were willing to go with startups that were new, and we've had conversations with people about, do you invest in startups? Like, you don't just buy their product when they're early stage. Particularly, you're investing in that company as a customer. How much of, now that you've been on both sides of the table, I'm curious as to kind of what your perspective is on how much who has invested in a startup should mean to somebody looking to buy it. So if I was looking at a startup today and saw that you were investing in it, or that Lightspeed was investing in it, or Sequoia was investing in it, how much should that play into my decision beyond the product and the people I actually talk to?
I think it plays a part, but I'm not sure how big a part, right? Even Sequoia and Lightspeed and Excel and a whole bunch of folks get it wrong, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the nature of the industry. So I think it definitely plays a part. Those are big brand firms. They've been monumentally successful in a number of investments, but they've had their failure rates just like everybody else has. Now, the level of failure in this industry is grossly underreported, right? And so, I mean, think about it, right? You meet a company and you're like, I wonder what happened to that company. And then you start looking, like, domain is no longer active. You're like, oh, okay, what happened there? So, in venture, one of the things to be conscious of, it's really you have to have outstanding, outsized returns from just a few companies that typically compensate for investments that haven't done well. And that's just, you can't bat 100 is what I'm typically told. So it does factor in, but not always. Sometimes you have to make independent decisions, and I think the right investors do that. And I think the same thing applies. I think if Sequoia are looking at something, I would say they don't really care whether some of the other firms that look at it. Sequoia will make the decision best for Sequoia, as Lightspeed will. So one of the things that we refer to this in venture is called the anti-portfolio. So it's public. So if you look at Bessemer Venture Partners, I love that firm. Iconic firm, has been here for decades. On their website, they've actually listed the companies that they have had the opportunity to invest in and did not invest. So that's actually what it comes down. It's not actually the failures and who invested. It's when you had the opportunity. And the quotes are there from some of the investors who had the opportunity to invest in Atlassian and in Tesla and go back as far as Apple and Coinbase, and they did not. And so those are they did not result in those. So it's a funny game, venture investing, and I think it gets even more. It's grown so rapidly over the course of the last decade plus, in my viewpoint. But it's also very, very interesting to just to see the activity. So, long answer to your question, but like I said, it's a factor. But there's so many more VC firms out there who've also been successful. I think everyone just makes an independent decision.
Yeah, I mean, so much of the startup space is narrow. That they've got that one fix, and I've done a few startups in my time, and you have to be comfortable saying, yeah, I can't sell to every customer, because not every customer has the problem that our fairly narrow product is aimed at. Now, of course, the products grow over time, and that's a sign of a healthy company, is that it becomes multifaceted and starts to fill more of those key use cases. But yeah, I like that you kind of said it's a factor, but it's not a huge one, because there's so many other factors that probably should be priority.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you have to make it. You have to stand by your decision, and sometimes you should do it because you feel strongly, right? Not just because somebody else is doing. So I don't tend to fall towards peer pressure very often. So
I know one of the other things that I know you spend some of your free time with is advising some of your CISO and CIO friends. What are some of the issues that they're kind of talking with you about at the moment?
No, unfortunately, that's confidential. I would not reveal that. No, I'm just kidding. No, so jokingly, about 10 years ago, I had a CIO dinner and I called it, it's important to put this context. I called it CIO group therapy because we were talking about a particular issue with a particular vendor. I shall remain nameless out of respect. And we're like, we're all suffering. Like, am I the only one suffering with this? And they're like, no, we're also having issues. And we kind of figured out a way to be able to solve some of the issues. And that kind of got a lot of collaboration going. And subsequently, I continued to organize this dinner, and then VCs heard about it because sometimes we'd be talking about some of their startups, or we'd be making decisions, and they're like, "What's this dinner that's costing me millions of dollars? Let's better get all this guy with a weird name and a weird accent and a terrible dress sense to organize one of these dinners so I can get some actual feedback on some of my portfolio companies." So to answer your question, I've heard all sorts. I mean, my network now extends to several hundred CIO and CISOs, not just in the US but outside, because I also held a CIO go-to-market function where I was connecting with customers when I was at Pure Storage, and so I'd meet with a number of CIOs. Typically, the problems are very similar. Okay, and so I alluded to some of it in the kind of my opening question. One is and why a lot of CIOs and CISOs typically reach out to me is I'm able to assist them in some way, shape, or form when it comes to the communication strategy, because I've learned through success and failure how to do some of that. The second is, so communication has been one aspect of it. The second is really about leadership development. So that's one of the things which is pretty consistent is, being able to build a team that can not just scale, but can effectively implement and drive change in the company as well as operate. And I think that's very, very important. So the lack of that is something that a lot of, and look, I've been lucky in so much that I've been a CIO of several companies. So I've learned through success and failure, through having leadership teams that, in some cases were doing super well, in other cases they were not. And what did I learn from that? You need to take time to be able to do that. Number three is, what I've also discovered is most CIOs and CISOs, they don't have enough think time. And I think that's a real big issue. To be able to, very important to be able to take a step back and think about, look, things take time to be able to get things done. And if you're constantly running, you need to take a little bit of a pause to be able to figure that out. Number four is sometimes, and in the case of AI, there are a number of issues that are still unknown. And so as a result of that, I have a lot of CIO and CISOs who typically reach out to me and say, okay, we're looking at this problem. Who are the 2 or 3 companies we should be talking to? Or we're trying to solve for this. Is this a really problem? How much should I be concerned about it? So the unknowns is a relatively constant part of an agenda for CIO and CISO group therapy. And so I think those things are typically coming to mind. There's could be a wide array. I mean, sometimes we had just a conversation about, how to deal with a particular member of the C-suite. That kind of went on. I was like, the restaurant's closing down. I think we have to leave now. I've already paid the bill. They're like, no, and you're not going to believe what they said then. I was like, I totally get it. I hear you, but we really need to leave now. It's a wide array, but those are typically what I've been hearing over the last 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, how do you deal with the unknown aspect of things really speaks to me there, because you've got to, as a CIO, if you're going to be successful, in my opinion, you're always trying to look over the horizon, trying to see the next thing, so that you can anticipate and make sure that your company is prepared for that next thing and not get sideswiped by something.
Well, part of the challenge is that you don't have enough reference points on the AI side. Still very early innings, right? With cloud and infrastructure that you basically had enough reference points. There was enough of an ecosystem, community. You go to reInvent. It's like 75,000 people, right? I mean, you must be doing relatively well when Vegas says enough, right? So, yeah. So my point is that when you have enough reference points, when you have enough practitioners, enough case studies, partners, implementations, successes and failures, you can take that in and start to make those decisions. We were able to do that in the world of enterprise software over the course of a decade. We're able to do that in the course of enterprise security over the course of a decade. New companies come into place. The software industry is imperfect by its very nature. This is what drives innovation. with AI, the reality is there's just a lot of unknowns. Number one is the cycle time that a lot of these foundational model companies are doing is existential risk, not just consequential and just incremental as you had with infrastructure. Second, the implementation, you don't have enough reference cases of end-to-end deployment, fully designed, fully worked out to see the ROI, the impact on employment, the impact on company. I mean, you have them, et cetera, but there's not enough, definitely not enough data points to do it. And the third is the speed at which a lot of these changes are happening and entire industry is being born is super exciting. It was agentic for a long while. Now it's all about MCP and focused on that. It was vibe coding for a little while, and then kind of people moved on to that. And so, that creates more unknown unknowns. And as a result of that, if you are at the stage, if you're a CISO, you have to secure a bunch of things in your industry, in your company. And if you're a CIO who's trying to harness this, it takes a tremendous amount of time and a toll to be able to figure that piece out.
Totally agree with that.
Awesome. Well, we like to always have some consistency across the episodes, and Yousuf, it was really great to hear your perspective. So I would love to get your thoughts on a question that I ask all of our guests, where a couple of years ago I had a CTO tell me that he felt like the fight for privacy was dead, and that now it was really the fight for security. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think those fights continue, to be honest with you. I think the fight for privacy and for the fight for security. Here's some of the things that I gathered in speaking to CISOs at federal, state, local, and at corporate level. At one side, you have a number of people who at the highest levels of some of the agencies that I've had to interact with over time, who said, do I care if somebody knows what my blood type is? And I said, well, not really. I don't care. What I do care about is if they have the ability to know it and then change it, because that does impact me, right? So I think those things are intertwined. And I think sometimes people miss that aspect of it. And I think part of it sort of gets messaged as if like, oh, it's just my right to privacy and I just don't want to know. Actually, a large part of that is say, if you have the ability to know, you there may have the ability to change and influence, right? And you may do that in nefarious ways, right? in a number of different sectors, or you may do it as a result, you're not taking my privacy and security of my data seriously enough, such that there are going to be breaches, and I'm going to be compromised as a result of that, right? So I think it's important to be able to factor that in. A large part of this conversation, unfortunately, is very, very difficult to distill because there is a lot of noise around it. I think we have to go back to core fundamentals. Why do we care about it? For example, if you have state actors, who are attacking this country or a country's infrastructure, what they're ultimately doing is as following. They are looking to breach industrial systems, hospital systems, corporate enterprises, and key pieces of infrastructure, okay? If they, for example, infiltrate a hospital system and they're able to take that data, what they're looking to do is to accumulate that data over time, allowing them to have leverage that they can say, we breach your systems, we're going to go back in and we're going to mess with the data. And just think about the impact of that to a hospital system. Prescriptions, treatments, data, finances, like this is mischief. And like, it's kind of scary, to be perfectly honest. And yeah. I'm not trying to basically, be an alarmist, but what I'm trying to say is this is why it's important to be able to think about core basics. I know the biggest challenge that CISOs have. Look, every CISO survey that gets published, the number one threat is always the same. Phishing as the weakness at somebody's going to be clicking on it. And I know it's annoying and I get it, right? But the fight has to continue because unfortunately, that's part of the vulnerability that exists. Unlike a lot of countries, the US does not have a national firewall, okay? We don't have, that's not how we operate. That's not how most companies operate. Oh, a bunch of countries do, and that's their prerogative to do so. We don't operate that way. And so as a result of that, we have got to be good civilians. We have got to be good practitioners. We have got to be good professionals by being able to make sure that we drive the message home that these things are critically important. And so as a result of that, focus on what the vulnerability of, the lack of privacy in a system, and focus on looking at why security has to be improved in a company. companies have got breached when they didn't have basic stuff like two-factor authentication put into place. When you have, your data in place and you're thinking, what just happened here, right? And the response from a company was like, oh, we didn't sort of focus enough on it. We're really sorry. That's not good enough. In this day and age, I don't buy it. So I think, sorry, I got a little bit, but this is important.
That's good.
Important. I think that you mentioned fight, so you got what you wanted. It is a fight that needs to happen, and I think it's a very, very important one. But I think it has to be done in a reasonable conversation. Not every company has massive levels of budget, but I will continue to say as my final point. If you are taking consumer data in place, you are duty bound. You have a duty of care to be able to make sure that that data is secured, and you put the measures in place. And you can't say whatever, we'll look at it later if you continue to do so, because that's the stuff that annoys. And so when vendors come into place, like startups, and they go and sell into enterprises, and they're like, oh yeah, we're working on these plans. I've just said no, right? I said, with all due respect, I don't want my data, I don't want my company's data out there in the dark web, and I don't want those conversations in place, because that is a risk to my company's intellectual property. And I'm, as a CIO in the company, I'm duty bound to be able to make sure I protect that. So that's the way I approach it. And that's the context for why people, take it from that perspective, because I think it's actually very, very critical.
Love that. That's a great perspective. And yeah, this question tends to generate a lot of conversation with our guests, which is why we continue to ask it, because we love it, because it's.
And you should continue to ask it. You should continue to ask it. Basically.
Oh, yeah.
Get that message out there. Yeah.
Yep. Well, cool, Yousuf. I really appreciate you joining us. This has been a great conversation. I hope everyone was able to learn along with me, as I took a copious amount of notes as you were talking. I loved a lot of what you had to say. So we really appreciate you joining us. If you can, maybe let's finish off with a little bit of how people can contact you if they want to going forward, or where they can find you on the internet.
Sure, totally. So happy to connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to make sure you're able to do that. And number two, if you're monumentally bored and you have trouble sleeping, I do sometimes publish my advice on LinkedIn, and you may basically hear that. And you're typically a few minutes in, that will do the job, no problem at all. But other than that, I publish my advice on LinkedIn. It's under my blog post series called Vest Side Stories, and feel free to sort of connect. Be happy to meet with founders and of course practitioners, and to be able to give them advice. And I would say thank you for doing this, both of you. Like, I think important for the industry to have more voices being heard, more messages going in place, more education being done, and I think platforms that you're basically building are a very important part of that. So thank you both for having me.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Yousuf. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you.
Well, that was an awesome conversation, as we kind of expected. Mila, what's your biggest takeaway there?
Yeah, I think I really liked hearing Yousuf's background, really as a CISO and CIO, and really kind of breaking down, the difference between the roles and responsibilities between those teams, but really still stressing that their main responsibility and often their challenge is communication within an organization and building a culture around the problems that they're trying to solve. I think was really interesting to hear, of just still saying, to be an effective leader within those spaces, you really need to focus the most on communication to get buy-in, to actually move the needle on strategy. So I think that was really interesting to hear that was still also a common thread with, the mentorship and advising that he's doing with current CIOs and CISOs, that it's still very much the case that communication is one of the most important things to be able to drive effective change.
Yeah, really doesn't matter what your role is. Communication is what makes people successful in most roles. I'm obviously, my day-to-day job is heavily based on communication, but as I do it now, I realize that the skill sets even when I was an IT administrator, theoretically working in the basement type of thing, communication was still important, because I was communicating with peers on the team and whatnot. So I can only imagine what it's like at that level, where you've got to do some heavy translation between your technical folk on one side and, presenting at the board and having your 5 minutes to convince them to do something. It's got to be huge there. I loved, as part of his answer to the privacy versus security question, he did a thing that I like to do, which is let's tear this down and let's question the purpose of the question in the first place. Like, what do we really mean by privacy? Why should we care about it? And let's talk about the individual components, because some pieces you may not consider to be private, but when you think about what you can do with that, could be. Or I really like the fact that he made it not about them stealing the data, but them having access to it means they might be able to edit it. And the blood type aspect of it really stands out to me, because if I'm in an accident and they go to some database that has my blood type in there, and if they were to change it in that database and all of a sudden I get a blood type that my body can't handle, that in an already life and death situation could be really, really bad. Obviously that could be very targeted. If you're a person of interest that somebody would want to target individually, or they could cause mass chaos by simply just changing everything in the database. It can be a pretty scary situation in that regard. So I think I really like the way he kind of turned the question upside down and said, let's not talk about whether it's security versus privacy and whether either of them are still valid, but really, turn the rock over and said, let's look at the underpinnings as to why we have this question in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I still also liked when he was thinking about what companies to invest in. I also really like his emphasis on making sure that it's a product that he would want to invest in, that he would have wanted to use, that he believes in. I think is like a really important differentiator for, I'm sure, his strategy.
Yep. And that was when I was in a sales capacity, I was, at a partner. So I wasn't pushing any one specific technology, but was really trying to be an advocate for my customers, both directly with them and to other companies, other vendors that were selling and creating technology to make sure that they were meeting my customers' needs. So bringing that real world perspective when I was a customer and I was buying these products and implementing them and needing that kind of thing. I would say my other big takeaway was something that really stood out to me, which was when we talked about why he moved out of a CIO role into the VC side of things, which is you want to be 100% about the job that you're doing. And if you're not 100% about the job you're doing, that may be a sign that it's time to move on. That has been my experience in the past too. Most of my job changes have been because of that situation where I usually put it as I just kind of get bored. But it's that concept of not being satisfied with the amount of learning, the amount of growing that you're doing. You feel like you're just doing the same thing over and over again. Some people like that feel secure to them, to just keep stamping the same machine every single time. But for me, I got into IT because I found the learning as the enjoyable part. And over time, I've realized that understanding technology made me a successful learner within IT. It wasn't the technology, it was the learning, it was the adapting and the growing. And that has led to why I haven't spent a decade at any company at this point in my career, with my longest being about 7 years at this point. So that one really spoke to me. Cool.
Awesome. I'm really grateful for having Yousuf join us, and I'm grateful for the introduction. And yeah, thanks for socializing with us.
Yep. Take care, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Socializing Security. We hope you learned a thing or two with us.
If you'd like to continue socializing with us on this topic or have feedback, we'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or social media. Just search for Socializing Security. Or you can email us at info@socializingsecurity.com.
Until next time, stay social and stay secure.